This album was released on June 3rd, 2008 by Sub Pop Records, based out of Seattle, pretty famous for ushering in some grunge music and also a lot of indie rock that we've mentioned already, but also a label called Bella Union, which I think is a UK label that maybe handled the British distribution of this record. Not clear if there was some sort of partnership there, but they're listed as the record label for this album. And again, this was the debut full-length album for them, who, when they recorded this record, the band consisted of Robin Pecknold, who we've talked about a bunch already. He was really the guy, primary songwriter, guitar player. What's interesting about the rest of the band, though, is when you look at the credits, they don't really list out who played what. They just list the name, band member, songwriter, and arranger. Everyone has the credit of band member and arranger. And then Pecknold has those same credits, but also he has songwriter and design, which I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean, because he didn't design this cover, which looks basically like it's straight out of Canterbury Tales or something. If you look at this cover, it's a cool cover. It looks very innocent on its face, but if you look, it's got this Where's Waldo kind of quality where there's all kinds of shit happening. There's literally, if you look close enough, there's a scene where I think somebody's actually being like serviced while they're sitting on a chair or something. But where the design came from, I don't know. But
I think it's a Dutch painting of some sort, or Belgian painting, I believe.
It is some sort of medieval painting from like the 1500s, if I'm getting my world history correct here. Nonetheless, the rest of the band comprised of, so you had Robin Pecknold, Skylar Skjelset, which, by the way, how are these guys not like playing for Bjork or something like that?
I thought you were going to say like the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, that's better. First of all, Alan, they're of Scandinavian descent, but they're not Icelandic. How dare you conflate those two things?
Well, I don't know.
Bjork's coming after you, buddy.
I saw a J followed by a K and didn't really know what to do with it. So here we are. Next three names of the band, much more forgiving, though. You've got Nicholas Peterson, who played drums. He came before the guy who became Father John Misty, which a lot of people associate with this band, but he was not actually on this original recording. Then you got Casey Westcott, who was keyboards, and Craig Curran, who played bass. I think they swapped him out later on. They did release...
Alan, that might have been slightly confusing to the listeners. There's a separate indie musician called Father John Misty, who started out as the drummer of this band, but he is not on this record. That's what you're trying to say.
Well, yes and no. So he didn't get his start with this band. He actually was sort of a well-known singer-songwriter in the Seattle area. He did play drums in this band for an album or two after this. So he was not on this album, but I think a lot of people are probably familiar with that name and know he was in the band, but he was not on this specific recording.
I'm just pointing out that if you already think Fleet Foxes is indie, then Father John Misty is one layer of indie deeper.
Yeah, I would say that. I actually do. I might get flamed for this. I think he's actually pretty good. If you watch his live performances, he's
his albums are amazing. I love them all.
Yeah, I've listened to a couple of them too. They're good.
Yeah. So they did release an EP before this called Sun Giant. Even though I think it was one of those Abbey Road Let It Be things where even though it was released before this record came out, they recorded it afterwards, and they planned on having it ready just as something to sell merch at the tour before this album came out.
Right. You're right. This is just like Abbey Road and Let It Be.
Exactly like
good comparison.
Yeah. I like to reach for the top shelf with my comparisons, but just in terms of sequencing, I always found that to be interesting.
Yes.
But essentially, so Robin Pecknold founded this band with Skylar Skjelset. I don't want to say that name again, so that's the last time I'll refer to him as Skylar at this point. So they both grew up in Kirkland, Washington, which is an affluent suburb of Seattle. Now
it's where the first Costco is, everybody.
Wow. Hence
the Kirkland brand at Costco.
That Kirkland tequila that you're all probably drinking right now. Where was I? Yeah. So, they were pretty well-to-do growing up. There's not much in the way of stories of like grit or hard scrabble upbringing. Although Pecknold did apparently drop out of high school to pursue music at one point, and he did some work in restaurants or something like that, which feels a bit like a very Into the Wild thing to do. If you've ever seen that movie.
Wait, to go work at a restaurant?
to drop out of high school while you're like a wealthy kid because you want to like live this other life.
Listen, I don't know that much about the Seattle area, and Marty, who's on the call tonight, lives closer. But my experience with Seattleites is that they're all kind of nature boy, flighty, into the wild, Chris McCandless types. So that fits.
Okay.
It feels like it fits a little bit. And, so essentially these two guys bonded over artists like Dylan, Neil Young, Brian Wilson, pretty much the exact people that you might think influenced them and their sound. So in 2006, they end up forming a band, and pre-Fleet Foxes, they started a band that they decided to call themselves the Pineapples. Now, look, what's in a name, right? But I have to think that if they stayed with that name, there's no way this record would sound like this.
Some pretty clear "we come to fuck your wife" energy.
Yeah. Right.
But luckily for them, there was somehow a local band that already had that name of the Pineapples. So they decided upon Fleet Foxes, which, according to Pecknold, was, quote, evocative of some weird English activity like fox hunting. So I think this is all starting to kind of make sense.
Yeah,
at least
so that's a lock. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
The name fits the sound for sure.
Agreed. And, as they were forming this band and writing the initial songs, like they obviously leaned really hard into this late 60s pop aesthetic with, lush harmonies, these expansive soundscapes, obviously evoking, some of these old school bands that we're talking about. They started to get some heat pretty quickly. They were one of these bands that, within 2 years, they went from basically nobodies to, headlining festivals and selling out, different venues and things like that. And as they were coming up, they caught the attention of this guy, Phil Ek, who I hadn't heard of before, but apparently he's worked with a ton of bands like, Modest Mouse, Built to Spill, The Shins, and
not just worked with them, but produced and mixed all the Built to Spill records, all the old Modest Mouse records, some of the Shins stuff, that Band of Horses record. Like, he has a really nice catalog, and of course this record. So good work, Phil Ek.
Yeah, total lightweight, apparently. But what's interesting is I came across a quote from when he first heard Fleet Foxes, or I don't know if he heard them as a band or if he just heard, Pecknold, but a quote that he said at the time that he discovered him was that it was obvious that Robin Pecknold had talent coming out of his ass. So, take that for whatever it's worth. But what's interesting though, is they had this pretty like meteoric rise, and I say that with the obvious knowledge that they were not household names. They were not like wildly commercially successful, but critically, they came upon pretty universal acclaim. But what I found most interesting about this, I mentioned Pandora earlier, is one of the things that they credit for their quick success early on was illegal file sharing. Like Pecknold has even said that without, Napster and peer-to-peer file sharing, that they probably wouldn't still exist right now. So, they sort of captured this like moment in time, I think, that was a little bit unique there.
I read that they blew up on MySpace. So that tells you the time period right there. They have to be one of the last bands to be able to claim that, right?
Perfect segue into our By the Numbers segment, one of our favorite segments here on the podcast. The first number I want to throw out at you, which you alluded to, Rob, is $250,000. So that's 250,000 for those scoring at home. and that would be the number of MySpace listens within a 2-month period that they had in late 2007. To me,
it doesn't sound like, I mean, at that time, like the internet was, it barely existed. It was like two candles next to each other sharing.
Yeah, I thought MySpace was like done in like 2006.
That was when Marty was still putting out the clap.
Yeah, right.
You got to explain that one for the listeners, please, Alan. Please.
Okay. I didn't know if that would actually make it on, but for the listeners, you may all know at this point, if you're avid listeners, that most of the members of this podcast were part of an outfit called the Chop, which came out of San Francisco around this time. Marty, being the provocateur that he is, decided to set up a MySpace page and create this entire fake band called the Clap. I'll let you Google that to figure out what that's a nickname for, but actually created a song or two, possibly with some drum machines and loops and things of that nature.
They were very humorous.
It was a legit song. It was about you and him going to a party and getting the clap.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I forgot.
That's right.
What are the odds that audio exists somewhere?
I don't know. Good luck.
Maybe we could ask Justin Timberlake. Didn't he buy MySpace at some point?
Yeah. I wonder what the buy the numbers are with that song.
Yeah. Two listens.
Yeah. It's huge on Chad right now.
Right.
So MySpace somehow was a huge catalyst for their growth. Next number would be 815,000, which is the amount of US copies that are estimated that they've sold at this point. So for this record, so they've hit gold, haven't quite hit that next level yet, but decent base of album sales, even with the file sharing and MySpace and the free music era. That feels pretty substantial to me.
It's a lot for a band that I think most Americans would say they've never heard of, to be honest.
Yeah, both those numbers are shocking to me. I would have estimated much smaller.
Yeah, well, they also did sort of ride that wave too, for better or worse, of being like a Starbucks type of band, where they were, I think, showing up on a lot of these Starbucks CDs and things.
I definitely saw this record for sale at Starbucks.
Oh, you know what? Change my vote right now. Sorry.
Yeah.
Take back everything I said.
It's right next to Jack Johnson's greatest hits.
Marty's vindicated. So next number is 200,000, which is how many copies this sold in 5 months following its release in Europe. So this is another one of these bands that I'm not going to say they were outrageously successful overseas, but their popularity at least rivaled what it did in America, and probably surpassed it slightly in the UK and Europe and Australia, sort of writ large. I know Australia's not in Europe, but I'm sort of lumping them in together. And then the final number I'll mention here is the number 6, which is the number of different publications that listed this as the #1 album of the year for 2008, which includes, for better or worse, Pitchfork, Billboard's Critics' Choice, among others. So maybe what they did not achieve in massive record sales, they definitely hit a sweet spot with music critics, for sure, with this album.
How was it ranked in your personal zine, Alan?
Well, it was ranked number 2 behind the Claps debut.
Yeah, there you go.